This time of massive change, Iowa State was handling things very well, and I was quite optimistic. But a few huge names just walked out the door, and it could be very troublesome for the Cyclones.
You are Locked On Cyclones, your daily podcast on the Iowa State Cyclones, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into Locked On Cyclones, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, now the #1 sports podcast network. I'm your host, Nick Marovets. Thank you for making this your first watch or listen of the day. I appreciate it more than you know. Be sure to hit subscribe down below so we can prove once and for all that it is, in fact, a Cyclone state. Today, we're talking coaches that are on their way out, almost exclusively headed to Penn State. Iowa State is in a very weird position. So we're going to talk about the coaches that are leaving. Then we're going to dive into the conversation. Has Iowa State become a bit of a stepping stone school? Something we talked about prior to Matt Campbell leaving. I'm bringing it back up now. I have a few points I want to make there. And then finally, even if Iowa State does become a stepping stone school, hypothetically, how much does it matter on the field? The coaches aren't the ones playing, right? Well, we'll break that down in the final segment of today's show. But first, we have to start with the big news that Noah Pauley and Jake Waters are heading out to Penn State. They are no longer going to be coaching at Iowa State. Noah Pauley, the wide receiver coach, Jake Waters, the quarterback coach. And the reason that this is such a big deal, yes, these are phenomenal coaches. These are some of the best in the game. We spent time, episode after episode, a ridiculous amount of energy talking about these two coaches last offseason, specifically about what Noah Pauley could do, with the transfers Chase Sowell and Xavier Townsend after what had been accomplished with Jaden and Jalen the year prior. Obviously, 2,000-yard wide receivers. There was so much hope about what this team could accomplish, what the new wide receivers, what the receivers that were behind Jalen and Jaden could do, what they could be this season for Iowa State, for Rocco Becht. And that's rightfully, I still stand by those comments. And Penn State is absolutely getting a couple dogs. But the reason I'm bringing that up is you're now missing a wide receivers coach and a quarterbacks coach. Where does that leave you with your quarterbacks and your wide receivers? I'm not going to say that this is extremely bad. This is like the end of the world. I still think we have a relative chance when it comes to those players, and we'll revisit that in just a few minutes. But this does not look good. I'm going to be completely honest with you. This is not great news. Now, we'll see who Rodgers ends up bringing in as a quarterback and a wide receiver coach. I haven't seen anything as of right now. But I think that will be very, very crucial, because a few of those players, those quarterback, or Rocco Becht and the other quarterbacks, of course, but those wide receivers, they're not only playing just for fun. That's not what college football is anymore. They also, and on some level, it never even was. These guys want to develop and become NFL players. So if they feel Noah Pauley and Jake Waters are their best chance of becoming NFL caliber players, they're probably going to follow those coaches. Now, obviously, the new guys coming in could be different, a change of pace. They'll meet with the players, I'm sure, and they'll pitch their case. But those two are huge names that are leaving this Iowa State coaching, it's not I want to say coaching carousel, but it's not a carousel. It's a staff. And obviously you're losing your Taylor Mauser, your John, this coaching staff has been absolutely gutted. And before I get to the hire that I want to talk about really quickly, I do want to talk about how I kind of think, losing Noah Pauley and losing Jake Waters is no good. I'm not going to sugarcoat that. That is not good for Iowa State. Kind of the same way, losing Matt Campbell, not good for Iowa State. We have a lot to be excited for in Jimmy Rodgers, but it's not really good. That's not a good thing. It's not like there are tons of fan bases out there that are calling for their head coach. That would be a good move. This isn't really a great spot, so I'm not going to lie to you. Losing Noah Pauley and losing Jake Waters, not good. Okay. It can be positive. There could be a step in a positive direction, but right now, not good. However, the flip side of that coin, how many times I've said coin has two sides. The flip side of that coin is Noah Pauley's not Noah Pauley. Jimmy Rodgers is bringing in guys that he is comfortable with. If Noah Pauley, if Jake Waters stayed, there is always going to be, a little bit of this is how we've done things here. This is how, and Jimmy Rodgers is going to say, well, this is how we're doing things now. There's always going to be an element of some sort of conflict between those two. Now, of course, those assistants know what their role is, and they're going to coach their players, and that's kind of what they do. They know, but also with a huge change at head coach, there is going to be some disagreement. And I think that could have been a problem. Now with those two on their way out, Jimmy Rogers has the opportunity to bring in guys that he trusts, are going to instill the right, progressions for quarterbacks or routes for wide receivers. These are the points that they really want to hit on for those position groups on these plays, on these down and distances, in these situations. They're really coaching in the stuff that, like, obviously I'm not sitting here saying that Noah Pauley was just going to go off script and say whatever the heck he wanted to say. I'm not saying that that's what's going on here, but there is an element of trust now with Jimmy Rogers bringing in the guys that he wants. And Jimmy Rogers then feels more comfortable and more like he's in control. Now, over the next few years, I've been thinking about this, if over the next few years, right now, what like Penn State is doing and Matt Campbell, they're bringing it over basically everybody, which we'll probably honestly talk about that tomorrow a little bit. Is that even the right move for Penn State, which is a little bit outside of my lane, but they are Iowa State players and coaches. So we'll maybe touch on that. Let me know in the comments below if you want to know what I have to say about that. But, Jimmy Rogers is doing kind of the same thing, bringing over a bunch of guys that he's comfortable with. Both Penn State and Iowa State now are in a very comfortable position, and that could shift over the next few years. You could see, Taylor Mauser, John Haycock, and Noah Pauley and Jake Waters out at Penn State, but in 2 years, maybe a lot of those guys have moved on to different opportunities. Campbell's bringing in, potential other talent that he likes more. Like, same thing here at Iowa State. If Rogers goes with this cast of a lot of guys that he knows and trusts and this, that, and the other thing, but then as Iowa State gets better, they end up going other places and you can replace that staff. So I don't think this is saying that like Iowa State or Penn State is the new Iowa State and it will always be that way. And Campbell's always going to have those guys under him. It's the same thing here at Iowa State. Like the Jimmy Rogers, like this is kind of just that initial, let's get everybody comfortable. Let's all feel good about where we're at. Over time, this will shift and we'll start to, you might not necessarily agree with like, well, I don't know, if that's maybe the best hire. I'm not even going to name any positions. I think they've all been pretty solid hires. But if there's a name that you see thrown out there and you're like, ooh, look what he did there. I don't know if I agree with that. Ooh, I don't know about that one. I don't know about that one. There could be an element of like, this just is a hire that makes sense right now, and allow Jimmy Rogers to get his feet under him maybe a year or two. And we'll talk about the urgency of that in this next segment, but I do think that there is an element of this can shift over time. Now, I do want to bring up really quickly, I'm not going to dedicate a whole segment to this, just want to talk for a few minutes. Iowa State has hired Chris Campbell as the strength conditioning coach. He was the UTEP director of strength and conditioning, is a grad of Iowa State, 2013 grad. Huge round of applause for Chris Campbell. Also, I applaud you if you ever had to take a Smiley class. Those are impossible. Just throwing that out there as well. Obviously, I know what it's like as an Iowa State grad as myself. I think that this is exciting. I don't know exactly what his plan is. I don't know exactly what his areas of emphasis are going to be. But I do think that this was probably the thing we most talked about this last season was we need to reevaluate the strength and conditioning situation going on here, or at the very least what's going on in practice, because I'm not saying that like I went back and looked at like the history of Iowa State and I was like, I just can't draw a super clean conclusion here. But the last 2 years, something is wrong. Something, obviously linebackers last year, corners, safeties this year, just too beat up. You just can't be having it. And especially when it happens all in one group, it's just a recipe for disaster. So Chris Campbell, honestly, the bar isn't even that high in front of him. Like as long as I think everybody stays healthy, he's in a very good spot, has a very high potential for success. And I'm excited, obviously, to have an Iowa State grad back in the building. I think that element of like having been here, being comfortable, the culture side of it, I think makes a lot of sense. And I'm very excited to see what he does. That will never be something that we can like directly say, well, on this third down, that was Chris Campbell. No, we're not really ever going to be able to say that. And that's, having been in that position and interning with those kinds of guys, like that's where they want to be. They want to be behind the curtain. They know exactly that their job is to basically go unseen. They don't want to be known. They don't want to be the guy that everybody's pointing to, because if they're pointing to you, they're probably saying, why is everybody hurt? That's more than likely the case. So I know Chris Campbell knows that, and I don't think his name will come up a whole lot. I hope it doesn't, honestly. Just means that we have guys that are really fast, flying around out there and staying healthy. So there will be a shift at the strength and conditioning coach position. or staff position, whatever you want to call it. Some are going to be very excited about this. Some maybe are not. I personally was ready for a change here. This was one of those where we were talking about, like, was it good to lose Noah Pauley? No. I was ready for a change at strength and conditioning, though. I'm excited to see what Iowa State can do moving forward as far as keeping players healthy. And I think that starts with S&C and also what the practices look like. And all of that's going to be completely revamped. The question, though, is could that all be revamped in just a few years? Has Iowa State turned into this stepping stone school? I don't think so, but there's a possibility. We'll break that down coming up right here after this. But first, a word from our friends over at Rocket Money. Ever feel like your money just disappears every month? It happens fast. A few subscriptions here, an impulse buy there. Boy, that is my kryptonite. And suddenly the numbers in your bank account don't match the numbers in your head. Rocket Money helps you get clarity, track every dollar, and stay in control of your finances, because managing your money doesn't have to feel like a second job. Rocket Money does the heavy lifting for you so you can save more and stress less. Seeing all your spending on one dashboard makes it easier to understand where your money is going. I know me personally, I'm like scared to look at it. I always go in, the wrong number is what I'm seeing. I'm like, that's not where we should be. The dashboard makes it super easy to understand at least where it has gone. Take control of your finances and cancel your unwanted subscriptions with Rocket Money. Go to rocketmoney.com/lockedon today. That's rocketmoney.com/lockedon. rocketmoney.com/lockedon. Today, we are going to go ahead and talk about, is Iowa State a stepping stone school now that they've lost Campbell? It was something we talked about before, and we're going to get into all of that. I have a few points that I want to bring up. It's all laid out very, very pretty in front of me here, so I'm not going to miss any points. But first, I do want to thank you guys for making Locked On Cyclones your first listen of the day. Thank you for making Locked On the #1 sports podcast network. You already live your team every day. Now take it up a level and go ad-free. Join the Everydayer Club and get Locked On Cyclones with no interruptions, members-only Discord access, and more, all for just $5 a month, or save a little bit and go $50 a year. Just go to the show notes below, check the link out, learn a little more. I think it's a great opportunity. I'm super excited about that whole deal. All right. This is something we brought up when Matt Campbell was kind of rumored to be leaving. I asked the question, if Iowa State loses Matt Campbell, is Iowa State now officially a stepping stone school? I did think, I'm going to be completely honest with you, that Matt Campbell was one of the last guys that really would stick around for years to come, would kind of go through the ebbs and flows, the ups and downs, 10 whole years at Iowa State. You don't see that a whole lot anymore. You really don't. I mean, you got like your Mike Gundy, obviously down at Oklahoma State, and there are a couple other names that you can throw out there. It's just not the same anymore and it's honestly kind of tied to the NIL and transfer portal landscape on some level. But it's just chaos. And so now that Iowa State has Jimmy Rogers at the helm, have they moved into this stepping stone school spot? And what can we do essentially to avoid that? Well, I hate to say this. I do think on some level, Iowa State is just never going to be, the Michigan, the Ohio State, the Alabama, the Georgia of the world. They're just not. I hate to say this. I just don't. It will take way too long. Like, I think that would probably take a solid 50 years of consistent winning for Iowa State to be in that conversation. And I hate to say that. It's just kind of the reality of the situation. Iowa State is never going to be regarded the same way that Michigan, Ohio State, I would say even Notre Dame, some of those top SEC schools like LSU, obviously you saw what Lane Kiffin did over at Ole Miss. There is absolutely a conversation where Iowa State just can't reach that level. And that's not good for the stepping stone conversation. But I will say this too. Iowa State, I feel like, has a charm to it that most of these other schools don't. And that was the big conversation with Matt Campbell leaving was, how he's going to be interpreted or graded, I guess, as a coach is going to be very different at Iowa State than it is at Penn State. The ring culture is very real. And I have some thoughts on what ring culture has done to college football as a whole that are not for today's show, but they have certainly impacted the game a lot. And at schools like Iowa State that are not this, like, nobody really is going into a season of Iowa State football expecting them to win a national title. There are schools out there where all off season long, they go in, they're thinking about it, they're planning, they're excited about this, excited about that. They go into the first week of the season And obviously with the 12-team playoff, it's a little different now. But if they lose that first game, like, well, it's a failed season. Like we're not national title contenders anymore. It's officially over. I don't think Iowa State's the same way. And I think that almost works as an advantage to the Cyclones. I think there's an element of you can almost not get comfortable. I don't want to ever use that term, but you can really fall into love with the city, with the kind of guys that Iowa State attracts. You can still go out and win against Iowa, your in-state rival, do very well in the Big 12. And I'm not saying that the Big 12 isn't competitive with the SEC and the Big 10, because I still think it is. Obviously, you can look at one singular game last year, Arizona versus Texas, or Arizona State versus Texas, or you can even look at, there were a ton of games in the non-con this year where the Big 12 was either extremely competitive or just flat out beat SEC schools. Like it just, especially the ACC, like it was kind of a bloodbath. So I'm not saying that the Big 12 is just some like rainbows and meadows, like it's all happy, good, whatever. Like we're not really trying to win, we're just having fun type of thing. But I do think it's closer to that than a lot of those big schools. And there is an element of like knowing what the fan base is about, knowing what everyone is so everyone is very in tune and very loyal to this team. Like there is no ring culture necessarily at Iowa State yet, which I think is a huge advantage. But that being said, the next few years are going to be very telling for Iowa State football, especially, but athletics in general. And I'm really basing all of that, obviously, on the head coaching shift, but also Jamie Pollard's timeline. If you remember, I think it was in early like April, we brought this up on a podcast where Pollard was talking about, in 2 years, we're going to run out of the savings we have. And we're kind of cooked. We might be the next UNI. Like we're going to fall out of the Big 12. We're just going to fall off the face of the earth effectively. Not a great feeling. So with the financial situation where it is with Iowa State, I don't think we can just assume that even if Iowa State is like, are they a stepping stone school? Are they not? What's the status of like with the ring culture thing I just brought up? The money side of it is very, very real. And so where does Jimmy Rogers have to kind of find himself in these next 2-3 years? Just how, imminent is the success need to be for Iowa State to remain relevant, to stay in the Big 12? And I think that Iowa State now is going to find themselves in a very interesting position where they almost have to be a stepping stone school. They almost have to, because you have to be successful to bring in that money. And I think Jimmy Rogers probably, from a money aspect, I'm not saying as a coach, what he can do, like all of that, from a money aspect, probably needs to be at least in the conversation for a Big 12 title within the next few years. Like it just has to happen, because that money isn't going to come from like nowhere. Obviously basketball is doing their part, but on the football side of things, like bowl game, very important. And Big 12 title, we kind of got to push for those as far as Iowa State monetarily. And if Jimmy Rogers and his supporting staff are that successful, that would be a very, very fast turnaround. I am not sitting here saying that that's like the expectation. That is a wild, like that would be a huge accomplishment. That would be absolutely exceeding the expectations. And because he would be doing that, that would make them all very desirable coaches. And so then it becomes a bit of a stepping stone school. Iowa State's in a very interesting position right now. Now, that being said, I did just say those exact words, but I'm going to go back to my point earlier about the culture and about, like with the ring culture and also Iowa State's culture, there's a chance that if really this is the dream job for Jimmy Rogers, if this really is everything he said it could be, he could just stick around for 10 years and go on some generational run, 8 Big 12 titles in 10 years, completely turn around the finances of Iowa State. And then obviously Pollard alluded to maybe the board is in a different spot now than they were a few years ago, finally realizing how important this would be to the university, not only of Iowa State University, but the University of Iowa as well. Like we could find ourselves in a very different position in a few years because it is a different environment here in Ames. And like if Jimmy Rogers went to 8 Big 12 championships in 10 years and won 3 of them or something, like even honestly 3, considering Iowa State's never won a Big 12 title, like you could be statue level coaching. And we throw that word around a lot right now, obviously with the whole Campbell situation, but where does his, obviously the supporting staff, they could be poached off pretty quickly. But as far as a head coach goes, as far as a culture goes, as far as what the university and the football team are about, what they're made of, that would be possible to keep a guy for an extended period of time. I do think that there is a possibility. So kind of both of those things can be true. Iowa State can be a stepping stone school, but it also comes down to, is Jimmy Rogers going to choose to stay? I think he has to be successful, which is going to make him a highly desirable candidate. But if everything we've heard about him is true and how much he wants to be the next head coach, or what wanted to be the next head coach of Iowa State, like, and they're successful, why not stick around? Then you're not really a stepping stone school, at least not from the head coaching perspective, right? I think that there is some validity in both of those points. But either way, whether Jimmy Rogers chooses to stay or go, whether his, supporting staff gets poached from underneath him, or if they stick around for 10 years, what does this all mean on the field? Because that's really what we all care about at the end of the day. The wins, the losses, what does the play on the field look like? We'll talk about that coming up right here after this. The holidays always show up faster than we expect, and if you're still putting together gifts like myself, last-minute decor, or getting your home ready for guests, Wayfair has you covered. Whether you need a quick room refresh, new bedding, or those final seasonal touches, Wayfair makes it easy to get what you need fast. Wayfair truly is your one-stop shop for everything home, with decor, furniture, kitchen essentials, and gifts for every style and every budget, all delivered quickly and easily. I am personally a huge fan of their selection being so huge. All right. I like to have a lot of options: bedding, decor, kitchen gear, kids' room updates. All right. I was able to find everything in one place with no massive delivery fees, no stress. That was a huge win as well. Get last-minute hosting essentials, gifts for all your loved ones, and decor to celebrate the holidays for way less. Head to wayfair.com right now to shop all things home. That's WAYFAIR.com. Wayfair, every style, every home. So now we've talked about Iowa State losing some coaches, probably at risk of losing some important players. I'm not going to lie. But we've also talked about, is this a sign that Iowa State becomes a stepping stone school? Yes, no, maybe so. I'm interested to see what you guys think down below in the comments of Locked On Cyclones, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Now the #1 sports podcast network, or on Twitter at Nick_Marv. Very active on there as well. But we do need to talk about kind of the bigger picture here, and really dive into how much does this matter on the field. Okay. Because last I checked, coaches aren't the ones out there. I don't remember when the last time Matt Campbell was that he suited up and threw a helmet on. When was the last time Jimmy Rogers put on a set of shoulder pads? I mean, we know they played college ball, so it wasn't that long ago. But as a head coach, I don't think it's ever happened. I don't even know if they'd be allowed to. Put me in, coach. Well, isn't the coach saying that? Like, are they allowed to? Can they call their own number? Nonetheless, we're going to just assume that coaches can't put themselves out there on the field and talk about the players, okay? The obvious point, the first thing we're going to talk about is recruiting. Now, when you have a consistent head coach, that coach stability obviously plays a factor. So I'm not going to sit here and argue that if Iowa State becomes some stepping stone school and we've got a rotating carousel of coaches, it's a good thing for recruiting purposes. No, that would make recruiting almost impossible. It'd be very tough if you got a new head coach every year, 2 years, 3 years. It would be challenging, because then the school has become known as this school that can't keep a head coach for a while. Why would I go, there's a chance that you would like the head coach, go there, the coach is going to move on to a bigger job, you stay with the coach. Like, there's angles where you can say that would be a good thing, but for the most part, I'm going to argue, no, that would not be good. But let's say that they're able to retain some talent. They're able to keep some level of talent on the field. My first thought went to JMU versus Oregon, this upcoming game this weekend. Curious what you guys' thoughts on the college football playoff are, because we haven't really had a chance to talk about it a whole lot. This isn't Texas Tech. Locked On Texas Tech is probably talking about the college football playoff a lot more than we are. But the conversation around JMU versus Oregon is like, is this a safety issue? These guys are so much more talented on the Oregon roster. And I think I've also heard a lot of people talk about they have cooler unis than JMU, which I don't know if I necessarily agree with. JMU certainly has, very, very neat uniforms. But the talent disparity is a big point of contention. I don't want to say it's extremely obvious, because JMU is pretty good, but there is a major point of, like, how is JMU even going to win this game? And why am I talking about this? Well, when there is that much talent disparity, think back to like UMBC and their 16 seed win. I believe that was over Virginia. when there's that much of a talent disparity, coaching is extremely essential. Scheming is generally how those teams win games. Now, not always, of course. The bigger team can get caught sleeping. If the smaller team, in this case like a JMU, is able to get some momentum going, maybe the big dog school just really can't find any momentum, there's a chance. It doesn't really come down to scheme, but coaches can't really miss even in those situations when scheming up these games. They just have to play to their strengths or find a way to eliminate what their opponent does well. That is a situation where coaching is beyond essential. That is a non-argument. Like, you can't even, like, if you have a group of, to use like college football standards, like 60 overalls versus 80 overalls, those 60 overall players are going to have to basically be perfect where they can. And it's going to come down to scheme, doing what they do well, eliminating what their opponents do very well. That being said, I don't think Iowa State is really in that much of a talent disparity across the board, generally speaking. Like, there are going to be games where Iowa State's going to be, they're going to have a bit of a tall task ahead of them. If Iowa State would have played Texas Tech this year, it would have, I think Iowa State would have been okay fully healthy, but especially defensively towards the end of the year would have been a talent problem. It would have been, how are they going to get this done? They are missing a ton of talent, and then you'd have to scheme it right. But for the most part, especially when the team is healthy, Iowa State is a legitimate Power 4 school, is coming up, and if not passing Iowa on the football side of things as far as in-state recruiting within those 6 hours. And they are a Big 12 school right now. Like, they're not and I have all the love in the world for those G5, 6 schools, like Sun Belt, MAC. Like, oh my gosh, I love those. I loved watching the bowl games earlier this week. It was Troy and Jacksonville State. Like, oh, what a good game. But admittedly, those schools are going to struggle to recruit, and Iowa State has better NIL, better facilities than those schools. So they are going to generally have a higher talent. Is it quite what the top of the SEC looks like? No, but it doesn't need to be. It doesn't need to be that grandiose to bring in good talent and not have to lean on the coaches that much. My point is, if Iowa State can keep talent in the building, obviously from year to year, it is going to be challenging if there's a huge turnover at head coach every couple of years. But even at position groups, like right now with losing almost every position coach, is Iowa State going to be okay? I think they're going to be all right as long as they can retain some talent. They're not the ones, like, they're not at a huge talent disparity where they have to focus and lean on scheme, because at the end of the day, you could call the perfect play and the players just don't run it right, and it's a touchdown. Defensively, if they don't stop them, like they just miss the tackles, boom, it's a touchdown. There's also the off chance that you call the absolute wrong play, and maybe you're on offense and your quarterback makes something out of nothing, boom, touchdown. Like, Iowa State has the talent to basically fill those gaps of scheme issues. Now, obviously, development, all of those kinds of conversations are going to be had about in practice, and I think that's fair. I think that that's totally valid. But when it comes to in actual games, I think Iowa State's just fine. I think there will be maybe a slight difference, but as far as position coaches go, they're not the ones out there on the field. They're giving quick pointers, but when between the whistles, between the lines, between the whistles, it is absolutely the players. And yes, they have to be coached right to act the right way during that exact 6-second period, but they are the ones out there. And the talent is close enough, in my opinion. Iowa State has enough talent where they don't have to scheme like crazy or, go and constantly be making all these small adjustments. Like, they could just let the guys go out there and play ball. And I think Iowa State will be successful. So I'm not too worried about this. Yeah, we got to retain the talent. Obviously, we talked about Noah Pauley, Jake Waters. Troubling, concerning. Not in love with that. Not in love with that. But if we can retain the players, I think we'll be all right. A lot of coaches out there are able to develop wide receivers. A lot of coaches out there are able to develop quarterbacks. It doesn't have to be these two. There are a bunch of bad coaches. I get it. I understand that. I know that. But they are not all bad. It's not like there was 2 good coaches in the entire country and they just left Iowa State. You can still bring in other good coaches who are going to develop your players. They don't have to be these 2. And I think from the talent perspective, do they have to scheme? They don't have to scheme like crazy. Iowa State is still a very talented university. They can bring in talented players. I think they're in an okay spot. Let me know what you guys think. How do you feel about Pauley and Waters? How do you feel about the new S&C coach, Chris Campbell? Where are you at as far as Iowa State being a stepping stone school? Let me know all of this stuff in the comments below or on Twitter at Nick_Marv. I appreciate every single one of you. I just heard you click that subscribe button. That was super clutch because it's completely free. Helps us prove it's Cyclone State, benefits you, benefits the show. I appreciate every single one of you for doing that. That was super cool. Until next time, Cyclone fans, sayonara.